On the Zoom website, there are options of putting up the recordings itself on the Zoom
Yeah,
website when you load it.
yeah, I think I have to do that, but I never done it because usually the recordings have been okay and I've uploaded them. So I don't know if this one was too long or something is not right because it kept going like this trying to upload. So I'll try that one, Samantha. See can I if I can do that. All right, so we are recording. So I'm gonna go over let's see. No, that's not what I wanted. I wanted to go over the lab that we have for today, which is an EC1. The only virtual animation that we found. So I'm gonna have the little PowerPoint, monosynaptic reflexes, and I'll share that in a minute. It's a very short one because is that all I have? No. Okay, let me open that and I'll go back and see. Modules. Yeah, here it is. Okay. So I'm gonna go share our little PowerPoint for the monosynaptic reflexes. And obviously monosynaptic means only one synapse, right? So this is the typical monosynaptic reflex where we have one sensory neuron and that sensory neuron is making a synapse directly with the motor neuron in the spinal cord. So this is the typical reflex where we kick or we hit the patellar tendon in the knee and the person will kick their leg up. And you can see there that the effector is the quad or quadriceps muscle, right? So monosynaptic means that obviously the handling of that reflex is at the spinal cord level, and there's only one synapse, as you can see, between the sensory and the motor, and that's why this is a very fast reflex, right? Not a lot of what we call interneurons for this kind of reflex. So the one that you're going to do for the lab is different types of reflexes. One is the biceps reflex. So this will be the typical, you know, flexing of the biceps. And what it's testing is for activity in the cervical region. And C5 and C6 means cervical 6 and 5 and cervical 6 vertebrae, right? So the doctor to try it will just hit this area here in the inside of the elbow, and it will hit that tendon. And we have those stretch receptors embedded within the muscle, and that will send the sensory neuron information to the spinal cord, and the motor neuron will immediately send the information, and we're going to do that bicep curling up of your forearm. The other one that you're going to be doing is the triceps reflex. And of course, all these reflexes, they are conducted by a neurologist when there's a suspect of spinal cord injury, right? And so by doing so, the doctor can tell what level of the spinal cord it may be affected. So For the triceps is a extension at the elbow, and it's basically testing about the region of the biceps reflex, a little bit lower. We include C6, C7, and C8. And so anything that if the patient is not responding with a positive reflex, then the doctor can tell that there's a injury in that region of the spinal cord. And then the typical knee jerk reflex is the patellar reflex, is the one that everybody uses for an example. This one obviously is testing a little lower in the spinal cord, is the L3, L4, L5, which is all the lumbar region. And obviously this is a common one for people to be affected. A lot of people suffer from low back pain, and it has to do with some compression in that lumbar region. So having a negative patellar reflex, then it will tell the doctor that there's might be some compression. And by compression, they mean compression of the nerves, right? That they're coming out of that area or region of the lumbar vertebral column. And if there's compression of the vertebrae, it means that it's pressing on the nerve and the reflex cannot be completed. So that's the typical one, monosynaptic reflex with the patellar reflex here. Then you have the calcaneal reflex, and this one is obviously by hitting the calcaneal tendon, and it causes plantar flexion. So your foot would do this, and this one tests a lot lower in the spinal cord. So it's testing for those nerves that are coming out of S1, S2, which are the sacrum, right? And if you took 201, you know that the sacrum is fused, but we still have those little openings where we have those sacral nerves coming down, right? So this is how we do a typical calcaneal reflex, and hitting the calcaneal tendon right there to look for that. Oh, I see a typo. I'd like to fix it as we go. All right, and this one is the plantar reflex. This is also called Babinski reflex. They do this to babies when they're born, but it also could indicate a severe problem in what is called the corticospinal tract. Tracts are fibers like nerves that are going up and down, and corticospinal means that it's coming from the cerebral cortex and it's going down the spinal cord. So abnormal means that the toes will do like a fanning effect, and could also indicate the beginning of ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease. And if you know this, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis is a very serious condition, progressive. The patient will ultimately die because they cannot move their muscles. Is degenerative and progressive. So when you look at that, on this side is the plantar reflex. We call it a negative Babinski. You want to have a negative Babinski, so your toes are curling down. So that's normal. This is normal in adults. When you do it on babies, because they still don't have a very mature nervous system, they will do the fanning, and that's called positive Babinski. So negative Babinski is normal. Positive Babinski is not if it's happening in adults, but it's normal in babies, okay? So those are the different monosynaptic reflexes. Remember, that means one sensory neuron, one motor neuron, and they're synapsing in the spinal cord, in the gray matter of the spinal cord. So any questions on the reflexes? Okay, let me look at the chat. Yeah, this PowerPoint is on their pre-labs, on the little button on the homepage that says pre-labs. These are all posted there, Christina. They're at the bottom of all the modules. So you can look at them there. 1 minute. Reflexes on exam 1. If so, how much will they be focused on? So yes, for exam 1, I want to make sure that you know which labs are going to be included. So let me go to modules and we go together with that. And let me share my screen here. All right. So for the first exam, we're going to have chapters 6, 7, and 8 for lecture. And for lab, we're going to have diffusion 1, 2, 3, 4, osmosis 1 and 2, and monosynaptic reflex. So those are the labs that are going to be included in the lab exam questions that I'm going to have. And again, if you think about it, I want to show you this, for example. If you do your labs, it'd be great if you can print the summary of the answers, right? You can study from those, because I will say, what is the triceps reflex, or what is the triceps reflex testing for? So you know C6, 5, and 7, or extension at the elbow. So if you're doing your virtual labs, you can at the end make sure that you print or record somehow, screenshot the answers, because my questions for the labs are going to be taken strictly from those virtual labs that you do. Okay. Good question. All right. Any other questions on the labs or what we're going to be covering for the exam? No? You good? All right. So now, see if I have it here. Yeah. And that is close. For some reason, the animation on this chapter is not working. So I'm gonna try to look it up and try to put it back on, because I can hear the voice, but I cannot see anything. So I'm sure you're not seeing anything either. So chapter 8 in general, think that is mostly anatomy. Okay, it's just saying where things are in the brain, what are the lobes of the brain, where are the ventricles. And I don't really ask a lot about that, because we are doing human physiology, not human anatomy. So don't spend too much time learning all that. I don't care, you're going to learn it in 201. It's interesting to know, and it's easier to understand the function if you know where things are, right? But I'm not going to focus a lot of questions on that, because that's mostly anatomy. But for example, let me see. Yeah, you need to know the different lobes of the cerebrum, just because we have some important centers and you need to know where those centers are for interpretation. Remember that the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord, right? So it's all kind of like one big thing. The brain, because it's up there, and obviously it's going to be dominating information going front and back, side to side, right? I like to hear from ear to ear. But also it's the one that has high level function centers, right? The brain. For example, we have the hearing center in the temporal lobe. We have the vision center in the occipital lobe. We have the language centers, right? For motor modulation of the language and also interpretation. So those are memory, right? So all those things are considered higher function levels, because they have to get over to the brain in order for us to interpret and make sure that we have an appropriate response. Now, the spinal cord is connected to the brain, obviously, and the spinal cord is a continuation of the central nervous system that handles what we call lower functions, right? like the reflexes that we were looking at. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we don't have to intellectualize that you need to run from a coming car, right, in the street. So those are functions that they don't need to go all the way up to the cerebrum because we can handle it with the spinal cord. It's very fast. It's just a matter of a reflex, and there's no wasting time, let's say. But if you think about memorizing or learning or things like that, yes, we have to send it to higher levels or higher interpretation levels in our brain. So I would say if you need to remember anything from chapter 8 is this little picture over here, because this is what is called, and it's a weird name, the homunculus. And it's called the homunculus. Homunculus means little man. So if you notice on this region here and on that over here, you have pretty much the whole body, yeah? So that's why it's called little man, because this is the area where interpretation happens and how we get the information from the outside. And when I say outside, will be outside the central nervous system, right? It could be external or even internal if we're thinking about blood pressure or temperature or things like that. So in a way, you have to know that we have this central sulcus. And the central sulcus is, again, from ear to ear, right? This is a deeper sulcus that separates the brain into an anterior and a posterior region, okay? So a sulcus is the indentation. The gyrus is the raised area coming after the sulcus, right? So the central sulcus is just the line. Let's see if I can. So the central sulcus is just the line, all right? And then the gyrus in front, in purple, is on the anterior. No, the purple is on the posterior, sorry. Purple is the posterior. So over here, up here will be the occipital lobe, right? And here will be the frontal lobe. So the gyrus behind the central sulcus going to the posterior is what we call the somatosensory cortex. So somato means body, sensory, obviously, sensory neuron sensation. This is the area where the brain receives the information coming in from sensory neurons. So from the back, we're getting that information into that cortex or that sulcus, which is also called the post-central gyrus. And then the one on the anterior, or the one indicated in yellow, which is toward the front, after the central sulcus toward the front, that's what we call the motor cortex. And that's where we send the information out to the different effectors. So if you notice that both of these cortexes, they are related in what they are receiving information from and how they're sending information out. If you look at the sensory, the yellow one, right? You see how right here on the most lateral, we have the swallowing, and then anything that has to do with the face, facial expression, vocalization, mastication, everything that happens in the oral cavity. And then as we go toward the midline of the brain, you can see that you have the upper limbs and the lower limbs and the pelvis and all the way to the foot. And when we relate it to the motor, to the sensory, sorry, it's the same thing, right? On the most lateral, we have the tongue and the pharynx that are related to swallowing. And if you keep going all the way to the midline, we pretty much have the same arrangement of this little man or the homunculus. So these two little cortexes are kind of like the first pit stop for a integration that needs to happen before we can send a motor response. So we're getting sensory information from certain parts of the body, and we're going to send motor information out from or to pretty much the same parts of the body. You can see where the foot is and where the foot is here. So here are certain areas that are important for you to know. Here you can see the central sulcus again. And remember, this is a deeper sulcus or indentation that goes pretty much from ear to ear, if you're considering the area or the region. The posterior is your somatosensory. So all that sensorial information is coming from the back. And then the anterior is the motor cortex, which is all the motor responses going out of the brain. Now, I mentioned that the temporal lobe has the auditory area, the auditory center, which is on each side, of course, for each of our ears. Remember, we're going to learn that our ears are receptors. So we're really detecting sound with the ears, but ultimately we're making a decision on what we're going to do because of what the interpretation that is happening here in the auditory area. Same with the visual center in the occipital lobe. Our eyes are receptors. The information is going to be sent here to the occipital lobe so that we can interpret what we're looking at. So that our response is going to be an appropriate one, like you're seeing the car coming fast, so your decision will be to run. But that happens because your occipital lobe and the visual center is interpreting what you're seeing with your eyes. Your eyes are actually the receptors, right? There's a saying that say, you see with your brain, not with your eyes, right? If you damage the occipital lobe, even if your eyes are normal, you're not going to be able to see. You can be blinded because you're not interpreting what you're seeing. Then there's this region here that is called general interpretive area. So it is kind of like between the temporal and the parietal lobe. And this is a region where a lot of synapses happen, almost like everything would land there because it's general interpretation. And then it's going to be sent out to wherever it needs to go to get a more refined response. So these are interneurons that are going to stop there first. The sensory neuron that is bringing the information will stop there first. And then from that general area, it will be sent to the appropriate response. And the other one that we have here is the motor speech area, which is called Broca's, which is only on one side on the left. And this one is the one that helps us make out the words. So moving the mouth and our skeletal muscles in a way that we're able to make up the words. This is an area that a lot of times is affected when people have cerebrovascular accidents. And so when somebody has this area damage, then they're going to have a very hard time modulating. So they will still understand, they will still comprehend speech, but they're not going to be able to move their mouth and their muscles to form out the words. So here you have a little summary of the functions like I went to. The insula, which you don't see in this picture, is kind of like deeper around here. So you have to kind of like remove the temporal lobe to see the insula. And the insula is related to memory. How do we do consolidation of memory? One of the major functions of that. this is something interesting about mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are neurons that are involved in learning the social behaviors and social skills. For example, when somebody smiles at you, you're walking on campus. I wish we could be doing that, right? But we are walking on campus. And even if you don't know the person, somebody walks by and smiles at you. Your mirror neurons have that learned in your behavior, and you're going to smile back if you are a nice person, right? Children with autism, it is believed that they may have a problem with those mirror neurons. And so these children have a very hard time relating in an emotional level because their mirror neurons are not developed or they are affected. So when you try to interact with children or even adults with autism, it's a little bit difficult for them to relate on an emotional level. So that's why I'm sure you've heard children that they will sit and they will face the wall for a long time. They don't have that mirroring that we learn as we grow and as we develop our brain. The other good thing about this chapter that I like, of course, we have different techniques, right, for visualizing the brain. By the way, the brain is one of the least known organs in your body. So even though there's a lot of studies and all that, people keep learning about the brain, right? So of course you have computer tomography, which is called the CT scan, right? You have PET, which is positron emission tomography. And this is where you inject the patient with the radioactive solution. And then where tissues are active, you can see an enhanced color or emission that you can monitor. And the other thing that we do that is very effective and non-invasive, you don't have to inject anything, is just the electrocardiogram, right? So an electrocardiogram is not really looking for malformations, for cancer, for tissue activity. Electrocardiogram only measures electrical activity. Did I say electrocardiogram? Electroencephalogram, EEG. So just like we learn depolarizations and repolarizations, those are electrical activities. And we have a bunch of those in our brain, right? So if there's some condition or something going on with the patient, this will be the first type of testing that they will do. They will do an electroencephalogram and look for the different wave patterns. So you have there the alpha pattern, the beta pattern, the theta pattern, and the delta pattern. So the two that are the most important here in normal individuals is the alpha and the beta. Remember, they are measuring electrical activity by placing surface electrodes. So just like we're going to learn that we can measure muscle activity just by placing electrodes on the surface, if we place electrodes on the surface of the skull, then we can also detect those depolarizations and repolarizations. And that gives an indication of functioning of the brain. Again, it will not detect cancer or tumors or things like that, but it will give you an idea of that electrical activity, which of course is related with being able to respond, right? So these two, alpha, are the waves that you have when you are awake, but you're resting. So for example, if anybody here practices yoga, alpha waves will be the ones that you have when you're doing your final relaxation at the end of the class, right? You're not supposed to fall asleep in yoga. You're just supposed to relax. So you have your eyes closed, you're awake, but you're fully relaxed. So you can see that these are very short amplitude. Remember, the amplitude is how high the waves are. and the frequency is how close to each other these waves are. So the alpha, if you notice here, they have not a huge amplitude, but they're close to each other, right? So this is the typical when you're resting, but you're not asleep and your eyes are closed. So it's important to distinguish alpha from beta, because in beta, what's happening is that the patient opens their eyes. So the minute that you open your eyes, you start getting a lot more stimuli, lights or movement in the room. And so these are the type of waves that you could have when you're studying, like your eyes are open and you're reading in a book or even on the screen. So this is where you will be doing mathematical calculations. So this is a very active type of wave. Theta are the ones that we get when we are asleep. So somebody that is really during sleep. And delta, if you get it when you're an adult, it will indicate some type of electrical abnormality. Now, babies have a lot of theta, and babies can also have delta, and that doesn't mean that they are not normal. It's only in an adult that we could have that situation. Oops, what's that? What did I do? Stop. All right. What else is very important here? Well, cerebral lateralization is important because of what I just told you about the broadcast area, for example, with language, right? So we have some dominance on one side of the brain or the other. But the good thing about having lateralization is that we also have the corpus callosum, which is in the middle of the two. And that's how we can connect some centers that are only on one side with the other side of the brain. So obviously having communication problems or some people that are born without a corpus callosum, they will have a problem trying to communicate the two sides of the brain, right? So if you notice here, this is how our lateralization is about. So you have obviously your right ear and your left ear. We both have a hearing center on both sides of our brains, the right and the left. Same thing with olfaction. But if you notice up here with the eyes, these are your eyes. And what you see here in gray coming out of them are the optic nerves. And then what happens is that the optic nerves are going to cross in what is called the optic chiasma. And what happens is that the left side of the left eye is going to be sending information to the occipital lobe, but on the right side because of this crossing here. And if you look at the right eye, then it's going to be sending the information to this. Actually, we're reversing this. The left eye to the right side, the right eye to the left side. So how do we compromise these two? It's because the occipital lobe is responsible for superimposing the information from both eyes. We have stereoscopic visualization. So that's the work of the vision center, is to make sure that we get information from the right, information from the left, we put them together and we come up with one single image. And then of course, we've all heard of the right side being more of the musical, creative type of individual when you have a dominance on that side, because in those regions we have simple language comprehension, spatial concepts, right? So this gives you a more right brain dominance, which we've all heard in common terms. Those are the people that are musicians, or they are dancers, or or things like that. If you look at the left side of the brain, on this side, we have the main language center, which is your Broca's area. And we also have the speech and writing. So on this region is what we say that you are more of a left brain person, and you will be more inclined to math and science and research and writing and things like that. When you do your personality spectrum, you're going to see that you're going to have, when you look at this lateralization, for most of us, you're going to have areas of the brain that they may be more dominant in yourselves than other areas. So in that test, what it will be the best type of figure to have at the end, and you're going to see because you have to connect the dots, it will be for somebody to be very square, right? Why do I say square? Because if you can have a little bit of everything, then you don't have to have a dominance. You're going to be creative, you're going to be great at dancing or moving, but you also are going to have the writing and the calculations and the research of the left brain. Unfortunately, we're not all like that. We always have a dominance, and you probably know which one is yours. If you're here, I hope that you're a little more left brain, but also if you're here because you want to be a nurse, you have to have your right side, because that will be the compassionate and wanting to help type of individual. And it changes with age, by the way. You can do it this today, and in 5 years you do it again, and you might change that dominance as well, because life experiences will also change how you feel and how you decide in your lives. So for language, we mentioned that we have the Broca's area. So Broca's area is on the right-hand side. And this other on the left is language comprehension. So if you look at these two, one is Broca's, one is Wernicke's, right? So whenever those areas are affected, you're going to be having what is called an aphasia. Aphasia, this is the word here, aphasia. So these are altered when people have cerebrovascular accidents, right? As I mentioned, the most common one that is affected when somebody has cerebrovascular accidents or CVAs is Broca's. And that's when the person cannot really modulate the words. Sometimes it will be Wernicke's area, which is your language comprehension, right? So in this case, the damage is on the right side, but the same height if you see it. But when people have Wernicke's areas damaged, then they're gonna speak the right way, but they're not gonna make sense in what they say because they're not really comprehending. The typical way is, or that person is speaking like in a word salad. They will put a lot of words together, but they're not gonna make sense. So this is what makes up for speech, right? Obviously, you need to be able to modulate your words with Broca's. You're going to be able to comprehend with Wernicke's, but you have to have hearing and vision in order to help you with speech, right? If you don't have hearing or vision, then it becomes a little more complicated, right? If you're reading a book or if you're listening to something and then you want to recite it back as a form of speech, then you need your other senses involved as well. Let me see. So the limbic system is not really a specific area. The limbic system is mostly around the thalamus. I have a question, let me double check. I said Broca's is, oops, Broca's is on the left, Wernicke's is on the right. Yes, that's what I said, Julie. All right, so the limbic system, and you don't have to remember every single little piece here, but know that the thalamus is involved, the amygdala, the hippocampus is involved. So all these little regions in green is what it makes up the limbic system. Now the limbic system is related to emotions, all right? And it's related to how we control our emotions. Now, a long time ago, it used to be called the smell brain because it also is connected to olfaction or how we smell things. So, for example, the limbic system is the area where you remember the smell of food that your grandma used to make, for example. That is, the smell brings up a memory. So that's what the limbic system does. It's like by detecting certain smells, you can bring up the memory of something that happened in your life. Or if you smell the perfume of your old boyfriend or girlfriend and you hate her, you're gonna feel that immediately. The minute you smell that perfume, you're gonna feel that immediately. Like, oh, you're gonna remember how bad it was, right? Or like when I was pregnant, I hated to have like air fresheners in the house because the minute I would smell air freshener, I would throw up. It was so bad. And my kids are 37 now. And if I swear, if I smell that air freshener at that time, it will make me throw up today, even if I'm not pregnant. Yes, it's body spray, right. But also the amygdala in particular is related to aggression, the fear, right? So it was a study done in some inmates in prison where they discovered after they died, very aggressive criminals, they had an enlarged amygdala. So, and it was a study too that they were doing, but they stopped the study because it was kind of like discriminatory. If you study somebody and let's say you study a child and they have an enlarged amygdala, would you tell the parents, oh, most likely he's gonna be a criminal when he grows up? That wasn't that good. So they stopped that study, but it is related to not controlling aggression or those very tough emotional behaviors. The thalamus and the hippocampus are related to hunger and satiety. So they studied this one in rats. And that's the way that every single part of the brain has been studied. And it sounds cruel, but the only way to study that is to know certain areas, destroy it, and then see how the rat or the mouse behaves. And that's how they discover aggression in the amygdala, hunger and satiety in the hippocampus. And you can see here where the hippocampus is, the amygdala. This is the thalamus. So here also is related to behavior. And the hypothalamus is kind of like below the thalamus. Do I have it here? No, but we're gonna learn it. And that's also related with hunger, satiety, and those types of behaviors. So several regions over there. Now, this is something that a lot of people are interested in and psychologists too, the memory, right? There are studies that they've done for people that lost their memory, and because they had some areas damaged in the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is related to consolidation of memories. So if somebody has a damage of the temporal lobe, they will have some issue with consolidation. Means that, let's say you study and then you're able to declare it, right? Now, in the amygdala, because it's related to that aggression or fearful behavior, that's also how we learn how to be afraid of certain things. And the amygdala is going to be the one that is going to make us remember how scared we were at a specific situation. When you do complex problem solving, working memory, when you have to remember phone numbers and things like that, that's your prefrontal cortex. So it will be the outermost region of the frontal lobe. And then the left inferior frontal lobe has to do with mathematical calculations. So in the inferior temporal lobe is where we store the long-term visual memories, but the consolidation happens in the hippocampus. When you put all together between the temporal and the hippocampus, that's the way that you can declare or remember something to say it back. So two types of memory, short-term memory and long-term memory, right? Short-term is recent events. So when you are at a party and people introduce you and they say, my name is, right? You probably remember that right away, but unless you put it back in your long-term memory, you're not gonna remember. That happens to me all the time. You go to a party, they introduce themselves, and then you don't remember their names. Maybe because it's not as important, right? But as I say, the only way to put a short-term memory into a long-term memory, meaning that you can recall it after, is if you do consolidation. Consolidation happens in the temporal lobe, hippocampus, and amygdala. Also, sleep is needed for memory consolidation. So it's important if you're studying that you also rest, because you're going to be able to remember more if you rest after you study and not stay up all night studying, right? You don't give time for that consolidation to happen. So you have to rest in between. I know it has happened to me as a student. I will spend my whole night studying and then getting to the test and forgetting everything. Don't remember a thing, but I thought I did because I studied all night. But this is important. Sleep is needed for memory consolidation. So long-term memory, how are we able to recall things back, right? So you have two different kinds, non-declarative and declarative. So non-declarative, it will be the one where you learn how to ride a bike and you don't ride it for a while, but then you can do it. Those are things that you can do it no matter how long ago you learned how to ride a bike. So it's a memory of those simple things, simple skills that your body can do. And declarative is the one that you all want to have for the test next week. Is the one that you can verbalize, you can declare. That's why it's called declarative. Declaring means you can bring it up back, right? And you remember that. So semantic means that you can remember facts, or episodic, where you remember events. Obviously, it's good to have both, right? So that's your long-term memory. So Alzheimer's disease has to do with a type of dementia, right? There's two things. One is just dementia or senile dementia, and the other one is Alzheimer's. Senile dementia happens to most older people, right? They start forgetting things, and that is somewhat normal. What is not normal is Alzheimer's, right? Because Alzheimer's is progressive and degenerative, and the individuals die from Alzheimer's. So what happens is that there's a degeneration of cholinergic fibers, and cholinergic fibers mean acetylcholine as a neurotransmitter. And when those neurons are not there or they are breaking down, they start secreting these proteins that they accumulate outside, and they form what are called plaques. So these plaques will start to entangle the neurons, and those neurons are not able to respond the same way. So these proteins that accumulate are called amyloid beta proteins, so AB. And these are the ones that form these very entangled of fibers outside these neurons. And that's what causes the loss of memory. These individuals don't even remember that they ate, for example, lunch or dinner. And it gets to a point that they forget how to swallow. So that's the danger of Alzheimer's, because these individuals cannot be fed anymore, and it's degenerative and very serious. What else? I don't care if you remember the treatments.
What is the main cause of Alzheimer's?
It's a gene, really. It's here. You have a mutation in one of these little proteins genes. So some people can be tested to see if you have that mutation. And so it means, it doesn't mean that if you have the mutation, you're definitely going to suffer from Alzheimer's, but you'll have a higher incidence as the individual gets older.
Okay, thank you.
So the other regions of the brain that are important, and we're gonna talk about the hypothalamus in chapter 11. But one is the thalamus. The thalamus, if you remember the picture here, the thalamus is the center of the brain. So the thalamus is a major relay station for a lot of interpretation that happens. So if you have a sensory neuron bringing information, it's going to make a pit stop in the thalamus, and then it's going to go somewhere else. So the thalamus is right in the middle of the brain. So that's why it's very important. The thalamus is also related with sensory information, and is also related to the state of sleep or waking up. The epithalamus, epi means on top. It's important because it has the pineal gland. We're going to study pineal gland in endocrine system, chapter 11. But for now, know that that's where this little gland is located. It's an endocrine gland, and it secretes melatonin. So melatonin is a hormone that is very high in levels when we are young, and it induces sleep, right? It helps you regulate the circadian rhythms. Circadian rhythm means the periods of day and night. So obviously when we are younger, when we're babies sleep a lot. It means that they have a lot of melatonin. As we start getting older, melatonin decreases. And that's why you may see that some older adults get up at 4 a.m. in the morning. They can't sleep anymore. So that has to do with the melatonin levels that we have, right? Some people take melatonin to sleep, and some are natural or organic, and that it helps because as we get older, our melatonin levels start to decrease. The other area of the brain that is very important, and we're going to study all about the pituitary gland, is the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is below the thalamus. So go back to the picture so you can see where. So if this is the thalamus, this little thingy right here hanging is the pituitary gland. So the hypothalamus is this region below the thalamus, okay? So the hypothalamus does a lot of stuff. It has a lot of functions, and you can see those functions here. There. So maintaining homeostasis, it has centers for hunger, satiety, and thirst. It also regulates the body temperature. The hypothalamus is almost like a thermostat. If you start getting very cold, the hypothalamus will be triggered and you're going to start shivering, for example, to increase your body temperature. It has the regulation of sleep and wakefulness, very similar to the thalamus. It's involved in sexual arousal and performance. It also has to do with emotions of fear, anger, pain, and pleasure, along with the amygdala. And for chapter 11, we have to remember that it is very important in control of endocrine functions, and it controls hormone secretion from the pituitary. Because the pituitary, when you look at this picture, the pituitary hangs from this region here with all the colors, which is the hypothalamus. So when we learn about endocrine system, you're going to see that the hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary gland and how it's going to determine which hormones are secreted from the pituitary gland. You don't have to remember all these little body, nucleus, and things like that. I don't care. Just know that this is the area of the hypothalamus. This up here is the thalamus. Below it is the hypothalamus. What else? Oh, this is my favorite. Let's stop for 10 minutes and I'll be back. I'm going to stop the recording until we come back, so we don't record silence for 10 minutes. All right. Let me see. Where's my recording? Chat, wait. How can we slow the spread of Alzheimer's? I don't think we can. They said that keeping your brain active, like reading, helps a lot. Doing Sudoku, for example, helps a lot. Just trying to keep your mind active. It happens that as we get older, we kind of like don't read that much because you can't really see well. But keeping the mind occupied is a very good thing, trying to guard off Alzheimer's. So I will stop recording and I'll come back in 10 minutes to keep going with this, okay?